thank you for being with us.
Thanks. And I invite folks to ask questions like right now, either in the chat or hand them off to Mandy. And Mandy, if you could keep an eye on the chat and shout them out to me, or if you just want to unmute and shout a question to me, that'd be fair game. So as was said, I am a university president, have a number of degrees. I have a master's of divinity from Harvard, a law degree, a master's of fine arts in writing. So I had a goal of staying in school till I could collect Social Security, and I might reach that goal being a university president. And so COVID has been challenging and uncomfortable and lots of other things, as it has for everyone else in the world. Mandy has mentioned I wrote a book about my rowboat across the Atlantic Ocean called A Pearl in the Storm, which someone has turned into a musical. The musical is called Row. And it's a little baffling how someone who is an incredible introvert, you can't spend 2.5 months alone in a rowboat if you're not an introvert. Two artistic types came to my office and said, "Hey, we'd like to get the rights to your book to write a musical." And I said, "No, I don't want a musical about me. I like being obscure." And then a woman sang 2 songs that were really smart and really on target. And I thought, okay, first of all, imagine musical about a woman alone in a rowboat, right? Doesn't scream Broadway, does it? So I thought the odds of a musical going anywhere were 0 to 1, so I said yes. And it was supposed to have its world premiere in August at a very prestigious regional theater, Williamstown Theater Festival, which has sent many dozen shows onto Broadway. Of course, it got canceled because of COVID. Now they're recording it for audible.com. It's the first musical in history to go to audible.com as a starter. And because no one is working, they have an incredible cast of like Tony nominated and Grammy award winning folks. And so that's all the news from this end. NCAA, I still serve on the Board of Governors, even though I'm no longer in the hot seat of being the chair. There will be a Final Four in basketball this year. I'm pretty confident of that. It's going to happen in Indianapolis, Indiana, and most of the regionals will be in Indianapolis or very close to it, in the hopes of not being a super spreading event. I'd really love a question to just find out what you all want to hear about. I could talk about skiing or rowing or life.
I know, Tori, when you, as Spalding University was facing COVID in March, you sort of created a unique message to your students about weathering the storm and what it takes to get through difficult times. How did you come up with that, or kind of what in your background of these extreme adventures helped shape you or prepare you to guide young students who are facing probably the biggest challenge of their lives right now?
Well, Mandy, as you've already mentioned, I have an affiliation with the National Outdoor Leadership School, and most of what I know about leadership came from Knowles. And there are tenets in the Knowles curriculum that are really important to me even today. Most of how I lead comes from that. So the first tenet is expedition behavior, which in civilization we would call compassion. We would call, it would be some variation of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Pull your weight, do your share. Don't do more than your share. Don't do everybody else's work, because then they can't grow. But that notion of being a good teammate is super important. Then competence. You wouldn't be part of Leadership Wyoming if you weren't trying to gain more competence in your own leadership and mentoring or understanding or helping other folks to gain some leadership skills. You can't be too competent as a leader, and people are more willing to follow you if you know where it is you're going. Communication is really hard in COVID. You think you're communicating, but this format makes it really difficult to discern whether you've really been understood. And it's unsatisfying in the sense that you're looking at dozens of heads, and sometimes they're nodding and sometimes they're answering email. And students think you can't tell, but you can. And then next up is judgment and decision-making, which go together. We all know people who have excellent judgment who never make a decision. and it's very frustrating. And then probably the most useful one for COVID is tolerance for uncertainty and comfort with adversity. And it wouldn't surprise you that I am a favorite guinea pig for psychological testing. People want to know what twisted me, what messed me up, what pushed me over the edge. And on every psychological test, I test incredibly high on comfort with uncertainty. You know you're comfortable with uncertainty if you put a rowboat on one side of the ocean and think, well, let's see if I can row it to the other side of the ocean. And tolerance for adversity, we all face adversity. There's nothing special about that. What's special is in this worldwide pandemic, we're all facing uncertainty at the same time. But it's not the same for all of us. It's more challenging for some than it is for others. And you can look behind me and recognize that I am currently living in a fairly privileged state. University presidents aren't struggling so badly right now. And then the last Knowles tenet of leadership is self-awareness, which I think is really highly underrated in the current environment. If you don't know who you are, why should anyone follow you? And I've made mistakes in all of these areas. A story that I like to tell, let me find a prop here somewhere. I was skiing across Antarctica to the South Pole, and we skied 7 days through whiteout conditions. And how you navigated in a whiteout, you don't go anywhere in Antarctica without your glacier glasses on. Hang on, got to get them out. And how you navigate in a whiteout. Well, I think I can find it. Well, I can't find my compass. So I have to imagine a standard mountaineering compass. It has a base plate and a sighting mirror. It's also known as an idiot's compass because the mirror shows you who is lost. And I was leading in the whiteout, and how you navigate is you find any landmark due south, and you ski right for it. And this day I was skiing right for my landmark, skiing for it, skiing for it, skiing for it, skiing for it. Colonel Ron Milnarek of the U.S. Air Force was my second that day. It was his job to correct any deviations in my course. He said, "Tori, you're very right." No, I'm not. I was young and perfect. I checked my landmark, bit of sastrugi, 180 degrees due south, skied right for it, skied right for it, skied right for it, skied right for it. "Tori, you're very right." No, I was young and perfect, and Knowles taught me how to use a compass, by Harry God. I knew I was going the right way. Checked again. Nope, perfect. Skied right for it, skied right for it, skied right for it. "Tori, you're very right." That's it. He's a dead man. I'm going to have to kill him. I never veer right. Doesn't happen. I'm a real Democrat. I don't veer right. I turned to give Colonel Ron Milnarek of the U.S. Air Force my very best Murden death stare. And when I did that, I realized my landmark was a spot of frost on my glasses. So when I talk to young people, I've stopped saying I'm a Democrat. I'm a real Democrat. I don't veer right. Because you can see the audience. Half the audience will switch off. And every Republican in the room will cross their arms and stop paying attention because they've decided I'm not worth listening to because I'm not one of them. And when I talk to young people now, it's like, look, we've got to figure out how to listen to one another. We've got to figure out how to communicate with one another. Most of us are not that far apart. And what we care about matters to all of us. And we've got to stop hanging out in our own echo chambers and listening to folks from opposing points of view. But anyway, I've told that story lots of different times in lots of different contexts, meaning lots of different things. And typically, when I'm talking to young people, I say, you get to choose your landmarks, choose them wisely.
Tori, another thing you talk about in your book a lot is choosing the attitude that you're going to face the day with, whether it's the weather or the current or whatever storm or obstacle you're fighting. Maybe share a little bit about how you kind of came to terms with that in your journey across the Atlantic. And then how do you do that today? Maybe what did that look like in March when all of us were waking up sort of wondering what if the world would still be spinning tomorrow? And doing that today where we don't know where the finish line is or what that looks like. So
yeah, it's a great question. Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl went through World War II in a concentration camp. And he talked about the ability, no matter what, you have the ability to choose your attitude. And you can decide, I got a flat tire on the way to work. You can decide that destroyed your whole day, or you can turn it into a great adventure. And, how fast could you change that tire? How quickly could you overcome? How quickly could you move on and not let it destroy your day? But we have the ability to choose our attitude in any given situation. In March, I was pretty, I was enjoying it a little too much because the introvert got to go home and hang out alone. It was pretty awesome. The only person bothering me was my beloved husband, who is the talker in the family. And then, of course, the virtual meeting and Zoom took over our lives, and we stopped hanging out at home and began living at work. And we, are working 14, 16-hour days, and there's no boundary on our time. And we're doing meetings on the weekends and sending emails at any given hour of the day. And I don't know about you all, but I've lost control of my calendar. And that's a challenge. I had advice back in March. It was easy to give people advice because there was just lots of errant behavior, the toilet paper hoarding and all that stuff. And I could be like, it's not about the stuff, y'all. It's about people and taking care of people. And that was the advice I had at that point.
What are you doing to relieve stress these days since you're housebound as a president of a university?
Well, I am very fortunate. I get to be on campus a couple days a week. We still have about 10% of our students are still on campus. About a third of our classes are face-to-face, about a third are hybrid, and a third are online. And the students we have on campus, you could guess, are the students who don't have good access to internet in their private homes or apartments. And so they need to be on campus to be able to move ahead with their studies. And the courses that are hands-on are things like nursing clinicals and laboratory things where it's really tough to do it in a virtual way. Obviously, everyone's getting really good at being creative, but it's still, if you want to learn to take somebody's blood pressure, it's really good to actually take somebody's blood pressure or give an injection. So you want someone who's had some real practice on real living and breathing human beings. But we've stayed safe. I still row, not as often as I did before I became a university president. My exercise of choice these days is to roller ski. So being in Wyoming, you've probably seen roller skis. In Kentucky, nobody's seen roller skis. I'm about the only person who does it, but it's cross-country skiing on wheels. And I do about between 3 and 5 miles each morning. And folks can tell if I haven't worked out because I'm mean and grumpy.
We can relate to the pattern of needing to get outside and breathe fresh air and be in beautiful spaces. I think that's a common value here in Wyoming. And you can tell when people have been cooped up a little too long. We had a couple great questions come in. One of sort of maybe comparing and contrasting what's more difficult, rowing across the ocean or running a university in COVID. Maybe in which ways? That's coming from a community college president. So.
Oh yeah. Well, that's an easy question to answer. Hands down, it is easier to row a boat alone across an ocean than it is to be a university president in COVID, and it's because there are fewer sharks in the ocean.
That feels, yeah, well said. Another question, maybe comparing rowing across the ocean versus some of your skiing expeditions. And this is an interesting parallel that you and Sara both have these sort of big ocean endeavors, but also mountain climbing or skiing endeavors. So what similarity is there between that, or how does that relate, or how do they differ?
Yeah, so I don't know what Sara's drive is, but for me, I've really struggled with the urban adventure and I grew up with a brother who's intellectually disabled, and I couldn't make the world safe for him. And we were bullied, and I went from that to working with homeless people and working with AIDS patients. And I just sort of went from one marginalized population to the next. And the more I struggled, the more I wrestled, the more I thought, man, civilization is messed up. And every once in a while, I would just turn my back on civilization and leave and go to the backcountry where things are more elemental. You have a goal, you have some gear, and if you're lucky, you have some friends with whom to share the adventure. And whether you're climbing Denali or some other mountain or rowing across the ocean, they're really similar endeavors where life is really reduced to a much smaller footprint, and you take care of the people you're with because you need them, and you take care of your gear because you didn't bring it along if you didn't need it. And so that world is easy to sort things out and sort things through. And then when I return to this world, it's easier for me to figure out what's really important and what's not so important. And in COVID, that's been pretty crucial.
One of the things you mentioned was how you just maybe naturally or through your endeavors have developed this high tolerance for uncertainty. And so how do you lead a team of people who maybe don't have that muscle as well developed, who maybe have a harder time facing uncertainty and have empathy and compassion for that, while also sort of steering the ship in a confident direction or a nimble direction? How do you balance those things?
Well, academics are not known for their comfort with uncertainty. They want the answer to every question and they want it immediately. And if they don't have it satisfactorily, they want to study it for at least 6 more years. And so you gave me more credit than I deserve for having empathy and compassion toward those people, because often I'm just like, hey, like, you can have more data. If I want to lose weight, I know I need to eat less and exercise more. I don't need more data. If we're struggling on enrollment, we need more students. Like, we don't need to research it. If we're not teaching the courses they want to take, they're not going to come. And if we don't have faculty who are engaging, they're not going to come. And if you want to stay employed, we need some students. So it's really, academics can also be willfully ignorant of simple economics. Like, they can explain string theory and Adam Smith's economic policies, but understanding that their paycheck comes from tuition income is sometimes hard for them to contemplate.
We have a few academics in the crowd. So
yeah, I just insulted all of them.
Yeah, I see a few nods from them. So it seems like it's okay. With that, I'm going to introduce Sara, and we're actually going to start with a little video that she shared that shows a little bit more of, sometimes in Wyoming, we don't know what sailing means because we don't have a lot of open water here. And so this is a video that shows a little bit of the kind of sailing that Sara does, and then we'll introduce her.
My name is Sara Hastreiter. I'm a professional sailor and adventurer.
Wow. Okay, so Sara is a Wyoming native. She grew up between Laramie and Casper and is a graduate of the University of Wyoming. She then went on for the last 12 years. She has lived, worked, and traveled in over 55 countries as a professional ocean racer, mountain climber, and humanitarian. After a recent loss of a campaign for Olympic racing due to COVID, she has pivoted and is working on a graduate degree and is studying performance psychology at Harvard. In parallel with her ocean racing career, Sara has spent the last 4 years working to be the first female and only the second person to sail the 7 oceans and climb the highest peak on each continent. After having sailed every ocean, Sara has climbed 3 of the 7 summits, narrowly missing the summit of Denali last year. She has many other accomplishments to her name, but I will let her share some of those stories. So Sara, thank you for joining us. And we put this on the introductory announcements, but this is applause in sign language, so we like using it in Zoom. So join me in thanking Tori and welcoming Sara to the Zoom stage.
Morning. Good afternoon, Mandy. Thank you guys for having me today. I'm really excited to be here and to be speaking to Leadership Wyoming.
Awesome. We're going to do kind of question and answer style with Sara a little bit as well, and then we'll jump back to both Sara and Tori. So feel free to put anything in the chat that you want to talk about. Sara, talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up in Wyoming and then embark on this international career of sailing and mountain climbing. What advantages do you think you had from growing up in Wyoming?
We all know that a childhood in Wyoming is rather a blessed experience. And I think kind of going out into the big wide world after that, the things that I really appreciated were, just to grow up in a place that felt safe in a lot of ways. It also kind of breeds hardy children. Wyoming is a place full of raw beauty and extreme environments, and kind of growing up, we adapt to those environments rather than it being something that we change to fit us. I think that really lent itself to, the extreme sports that I ended up getting into. Also just a huge sense of like work ethic. You grow up on a small farm in Wyoming, you have a great sense of work ethic. So it wasn't hard for me to kind of transition into ocean racing, which is extremely hard because I grew up working really hard in extreme environments as well.
We have another little photo of you, but one of the things you've shared that you enjoy talking about is around the concept of failure and what it means to fail. So you have these large endeavors, and you can talk a little bit more about those too. But do you want me to show this photo?
Sure.
Right. Okay.
It's very flattering.
Do you want to just talk a little bit about what's happening here?
Yeah, so kind of, failure was something for me before I took this photo that I wasn't really comfortable with it being a part of my life. And I think like right now during COVID, a lot of us are really trying to cope with things not turning out as we expect them to. So this photo was taken in June of 2019. I was about 15 minutes away from turning around on Denali. It had taken me about a year to get to this moment, let alone the years that it took before that climbing other mountains. So this was, 9 months of training. It was a partnership with a great sponsor and a really fantastic charity that I was supporting. And there was a lot of people watching and cheering me on, and a lot of people who had helped to get me to this point. And I didn't know it at the time, but I had a chest infection that was developing. And what that kind of feels like at altitude is just the first few days, you're not entirely sure what's going on. And it wasn't clear until I got off the mountain that it was a chest infection. So at this point, it could have been altitude sickness. And it's not something that you should take lightly. And it's something that I made the decision to turn around because I didn't feel it was other people's responsibility to get me off the mountain safely. It was a 20-day expedition, and here I was 1,300 feet from the summit after, 9 months of training to get me right to this point. And climbing mountains is not horseshoes and hand grenades. You need to stand on the summit in order for it to count, particularly for a world record. And as I kind of turned around at that moment, one of the guides leaned over and whispered to me that the journey, the climb is for the soul and the summit is for the ego. And at that moment, like I could have cared less because I just wanted to get to the summit. It was about my ego. And, for a while I was really upset because I felt like I had let other people down and I had let myself down. But I think the thing that I started to reflect on was actually, it's a failure in terms of not reaching the summit, but like what parts of that journey were actually a success. Like I had come from knee surgery, I had a sponsor, I partnered with a really fantastic charity and was able to raise a lot of money and awareness for access to clean water. So in a lot of ways, it was actually a really successful expedition, except the last 1,300 feet of it. So that was kind of the thing that I started to reflect upon with failure or not, like achieving our goals, is what were we actually able to achieve within that? I'm sure there's so many objectives along the way that we have to get to even get to that point on a mountain. So it's looking at the things that did go right instead of focusing on, the one thing that did go wrong.
Thanks, Sara. And maybe we have a question in the chat, which I think will maybe play into this too, of how did you get into sailing specifically, coming from Wyoming? What was your introduction to open water? And then maybe likewise, you had this, Olympic campaign that you were working towards, and COVID put a pretty big wrench in that plan. And so how did you adjust from your plan and your vision to trying to make the most of this time when what you were working towards was literally taken off the table as an option for you? So maybe like the bookends of starting to sail and then what the last 6 months have looked like.
Yeah, I did go to the University of Wyoming. I studied international studies with a regional focus in Africa, and that had taken me to Africa, and then another internship took me to the Caribbean, where I ended up moving to when I finished school. So I actually started sailing there. And I'd always been really adventurous. I think a lot of that comes from growing up in Wyoming and not being afraid of wide open spaces and being alone. And I wanted to cross an ocean, and I found out a way to facilitate that with a rally that goes across the Atlantic where people need crew. During that first Atlantic crossing, I read a lot of books about people who raced across oceans, and was just really inspired to kind of follow that. And I actually at the time thought it'd just be a really great way to pay off my student loans, and have adventure at the same time. And then, like most things, I ended up taking it very seriously. And I joined a race called the Volvo Ocean Race 3 years after starting to sail. That kind of launched my professional career. It was a race around the world with an all-female team. And from there, I kind of started to mix in the mountain goals for the world first record with my sailing career. And then kind of following that, an opportunity was presented to me to represent the US on an Olympic campaign for the 2024 Olympics. For the last year, I've been working on that campaign, and I lost the campaign in June of this year. And it was a very finite stop for that situation. So instead of dwelling on the fact that I had lost the campaign and that was what I had planned for the next 4 years, for me, it was about, accepting that loss, giving that space, but very quickly figuring out what I wanted to do next. I think it's really important, particularly at the difficult junctures in our life, to continue to move forward. And I had been looking at psychology for a long time. And so I decided right now I could sit at home and watch Netflix for 6 months because it's a hard environment to be productive. But I decided, why not, pursue my master's degree right now? So I started a program at Harvard in August.
Awesome. And maybe how do you sort of, that mental process, I think it's really easy to describe it in terms of rowing across the ocean of you have to face your demons, you have to keep going, or in a sailing endeavor, or climbing a mountain and facing those failures. But how do you use those tools on a day-to-day basis? How are you processing, okay, I'm going to work through this timing and now, or this emotion and process, and now I'm going to launch into the next thing? And I think maybe as you're thinking through that, the context is we've all changed our minds and changed our plans 1 million times in the last 8 months. And so it can be really exhausting to go through that mental process of, okay, I had a plan, now I lost the plan, or the plan's no longer possible, I'm going to iterate, and being able to sort of stay in that present moment with the plan, knowing that it may change again. So I don't know. And maybe Tori, we'll kick this back to you too after Sara answers, now that I asked the question without including you. But if you have any thoughts of how you stay present and engaged in this rapidly changing decision environment.
Yeah, I think the thing that I keep coming back to in my own life and when I talk to other people is just like this matter of resilience. And we kind of look at resilience and we think, is that something that people have, or is that actually a skill set that we can develop? And it is a skill set. And it being a skill set, thinking of it as like, a muscle, we need to practice resilience. And right now we're all kind of being forced into that situation. And, it's it's about being adaptable. It's about, your toughness and your ability to adapt and bounce back from these different circumstances. And I try to check in with myself frequently. I think that's really important because all of us right now kind of have a baseline of stress and anxiety in our lives that's kind of just induced by a worldwide pandemic. And we all have these big senses of loss. Maybe we can't spend Thanksgiving with our family. Maybe, we had to adapt and change a conference to be online instead of in person. We don't get to see those people. So it's about, instead of recognizing all of the things that we've lost this year, I think we need to focus on the things that we still have. There was a quote I found recently that I really liked, and it was, "Don't lose what you have to what you have lost." And I think that's just really important to focus on the good that we do have. But you have to be gentle with yourself right now. As a leader, you have to be gentle with your employees. So many individuals are going through so many things that we may or may not be aware of. And so I think it's just really important to have a sense of empathy and a sense of flexibility. And, be kind to yourself and others right now while we all go through this together. There will be a stopping point to this. It's not like it's going to go on forever, but it's certainly lasting longer than we anticipated.
Awesome. Thank you. Sara, you mentioned that when you started sailing, you had very little technical experience, or you didn't have a big background to come in and say, I'm going to be a great addition to your team. How did you balance that confidence of knowing you were just stepping in to learn something new and do something new, but also being confident that you had the skills and you had something to contribute? How did you kind of balance that twofold perspective?
I think in, my sailing career in particular, I kind of had the advantage in a way of being the least experienced person who kept moving forward, because what that gave me was this like constant state of learning. And, I don't think that's something that any of us should ever lose. And again, going back to ego, that's something that gets in the way of learning opportunities and learning environments. And, I was in one of the toughest races on the planet with the best female sailors in the world, sailing against, some of the best male sailors in the world. Yet I was still learning all the time. And looking from the outside, you would think, oh, she probably, is accomplished to this particular level in order to be there. But really my enthusiasm to be there and to continue to learn, and my adaptation to that, was one of the reasons I was chosen to be on that team out of the hundreds of women that applied. I think it's just, it's really important, like now and always, to look at things in terms of like, how can I be a better teammate to the people around me? And I always kind of go back to that, because we are social creatures. Very few of us exist in our own insular world in any capacity. So you look at things that can help others before yourself, and that tends to be something that benefits you mutually.
Maybe Sara, we'll end with one last question to you, which is, what's it feel like to be back in Wyoming? 55 countries between where you grew up and where you're calling home now. What does that feel like, or what are you enjoying?
Yeah. For this exact moment, I try not to do this too often, but every once in a while you try to think like, where would I be? Where was I supposed to be right now? And it certainly wasn't Wyoming. I was supposed to be doing an Olympic campaign. I would have been somewhere on the East Coast of the US or in Europe. After those circumstances changed, my plan was still to go back to Europe. COVID continued. And I thought, where can I go in the US that fills my soul? And it's Wyoming. It's a place, like, people here are so kind and so caring. And, we were joking the other night that most of the time, like, I got stuck in the snow, and most of the time you're just like trying to wave people on because everyone wants to stop and help. And I just really appreciate that. And it's a big state that's spread out, but it really has a sense of community. And that was something that I was really looking forward to being a part of again, and having the chance to have that.
Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you back. And thanks to both of you for joining us today and sharing with us some of your adventures and your wisdom. I'll echo Tori's quote in her book that I love so much, which is, "You don't gather wisdom on a feather bed." So thank you both for being here and for kicking off this day.